The battle for the mind of North America will be fought in the video arena.
Good evening, everyone. My apologies. I'm looking at the clock on the back wall and thinking I have 10 minutes. And then people are looking at me antsy like it's, 7. Okay, we'll get things underway. So, good evening, everyone. Welcome to an event full of solutions for a new Alberta, proudly brought to you by Alberta Prosperity Project. Before we begin, I'd like to take care of a few housekeeping items. So there is an exit to my left, an exit to my right. The women's bathroom is to my left, and the men's is to the right. If you haven't yet, there's water and a candy bowl, so help yourself. Keep hydrated in these days of heat. We have a membership table and an intent to vote yes table and a merchandise table. And we encourage you to stop by there and take some of the handouts home with you. There is means to scan the QR code and also pass that around to others, because every voice, every action, and every Alberta supporter is vital to our mission. The event for this evening will feature 3 speakers sharing insight into the future of Alberta. We kindly ask that there's no questions during their presentation, but we will have a Q&A at the end, and we try not to drag it on too long, so if you want to ask a question, please get in line right away. Don't wait till the end, because we try to keep it to half an hour, no longer than 45 minutes. There'll be no disruptions. We're here for respectful discussion and learning. And if disruptions occur, we reserve the right to ask individuals to leave in fairness to our guests and presenters who are here to learn about the future of Alberta. We'd ask you to please turn your cell phones to silent. And when you approach the mic, just please give us your first name to introduce yourself. So, introductions. My name is Lorna Guiton. I'm the MC for this evening. I've been involved with Alberta Prosperity since April 2022. I started out as a chapter leader, then I got bumped to a regional leader, and now I'm a provincial leader, which means that for the Southwest area, everyone in the Southwest area is under me, and then there's regional leaders. There are regional leaders that will be under that, as well as people representing the towns with chapters. I'm proud to stand before you, not just as a supporter of this project, but as someone deeply passionate about our mission to achieve a referendum for Alberta's independence and prosperity. For those new to our movement, the Alberta Prosperity Project is a nonpartisan, not-for-profit educational society. Our mission is to educate, inspire, and advocate for all Albertans about the benefits of freedom and prosperity through independence. And just by a show of hands, how many have never been to an APP presentation before? Welcome. This movement began in May 2021 in a humble oil field shop in Nisku, Alberta, where a group of Albertans, tired of the inefficiencies of our provincial leadership and the overreach from Ottawa, decided it was time to act. Out of those humble beginnings, the Alberta Prosperity Project was born, and here we are today. We traditionally have always begun our meetings with a non-denominational prayer, reserving a moment to reflect and unify. So if you'll join me in that prayer and silence at this time. Sovereign Creator, we are thankful for your presence with us today, for your continued guidance and support in our lives, that we may use our blessings to make a positive impact in the world. We are grateful for the selflessness and generosity of volunteers who give their time and resources to serve others. We pray that you bless these individuals with the strength, joy, and compassion they need to make a difference in the lives of those they serve. We come to you with grateful hearts. We ask for good communication, clarity, and understanding with the topics brought forward tonight. May we never take for granted the love and abundance that surrounds us, and may we always strive to be a source of light and positivity for those around us. Pray for safe travel and health for those presenting or returning home. Amen. As I said, I'm the provincial leader for Southwest Alberta and a regional leader within the Livingston Range McLeod constituency, and I serve on the Alberta Prosperity's operational team and chair the weekly regional leaders meetings. I would like to welcome you all here this evening for a discussion about Alberta independence. Back in 2021, I started to question things when things I was told compared to what I observed did not add up. The darkest day of my life was on my birthday, February 18th, 2022, when I saw the government turn on its people, the very people asking only to speak to their government. I started listening to Chris Scott from Mirror, Alberta, following him and Carrie Lambert to Ottawa and back. When Chris got home, he mentioned Alberta Prosperity Project. I had heard about the first meeting in Foremost, Alberta, and it perked my interest because I used to live in that community. My husband Dennis and I attended a meeting in High River, but we were not completely sold. We went to a second meeting in Blackie, hearing things a second time, picking up what I missed. The first time convinced me it was time for me to get involved. I researched Alberta Prosperity Project more and found that one of their founding principles referred to the following: the supremacy of God to provide a moral and ethical foundation for a constitution of Alberta, civil society, and the rule of law, as well as for the policies and governance proposed, which currently is part of the Constitution of Canada. That convinced me that this nonprofit, nonpartisan, educational society, was for me. Why? Because I don't want my kids and grandkids to live in a country that I see coming. I began reading books. Corey Morgan's Sovereignist Handbook and Donald Lee's What the Hell is Going On and the Way Forward. I then began to understand that things have been broken for a very long time. Our province was grounded with values and morals from our founding premiers, William Aberhart and Ernest Manning, and we strayed so far from those values. I knew that it was up to us, the people, to get things back on track. And as Chris Scott often says, get off your couch and make your voice heard. Tonight, as we listen to our speakers, I ask you to consider these questions. Is the hill you are willing to die on about saving Canada, knowing where it's heading? Or are you willing to fight for your family, friends, and neighbors' rights and freedoms through a successful referendum for an independent Alberta? I am here. Where are you? After our second speaker, who will be Tanner, we will be passing the donation buckets, and the donations are used to put these events on, to pay for our speakers to travel and their lodgings. We're starting an advertising campaign. If you haven't been on Facebook, check it out, because they're posting things 3 and 4 and 5 times a day. And it's excellent information. They're also posting things on our website, albertaprosperityproject.com. We have a new website, albertaprosperitynow.com, and it's a little bit user-friendly. It's for the younger generation, so check those 2 sites out. I would like to now introduce our first speaker, Tanya Clemens. Tanya Clemens is an Alberta farmer, teacher, and mom, bringing grassroots grit and heartfelt conviction to the sovereignty movement. She combines real-life experience with data-driven insight to show how independence can mean lower taxes, strong pensions, and lasting prosperity for Alberta families, all rooted in the values of faith, family, and freedom. Tanya is a key member of the operation team with Alberta Prosperity Project and was recently featured in Maclean's magazine. So please help me welcome Tanya Clemens.
Good evening, friends. I stand before you tonight not as a politician, not as an economist, but as a farmer, a teacher, and a mom. I stand here as someone who loves this province with everything she's got. I'm one of a very, very many people who donate their time to the Alberta Prosperity Project, hoping that the message from one of us will resonate with you and that you will join us in standing up for Alberta. The Alberta Prosperity Project is a grassroots, nonprofit movement formed to educate Albertans about sovereignty and to build support for holding a binding referendum on Alberta becoming an independent nation. Thanks. Our mission is rooted in the belief that Alberta has been economically and politically disadvantaged within Confederation for over a century, and that independence offers a path to greater freedom, prosperity, and self-determination. And that's why I'm here, because I want more than survival for Alberta families. I want prosperity, I want dignity, I want freedom. So let me ask you this. When you look at Canada today, do you believe that Ottawa is honoring and respecting your faith, your family, and your freedom? No. If you answer no, well then you already understand why Alberta has to stand up. From the very beginning, Alberta was never meant to be treated as an equal. In 1904, Clifford Sifton, who was the federal minister of bringing Alberta into Confederation, said it out loud, and this is his direct quote: "We desire that the great trade and wealth of the prairies shall go to enrich our people in the East, to build up our factories and our places of work, and in every legitimate way contribute to our prosperity." That wasn't about Alberta's prosperity, that was about using Alberta as a colony to fund Quebec and Ontario. Decade after decade, Ottawa carried out that plan. The clearest example, in 1980, when Pierre Trudeau's energy minister, Marc Lalonde, rolled out the National Energy Program. He admitted the plan was to stop Alberta from becoming the economic powerhouse of this country, and his exact words were, "We couldn't let Alberta become the center of economic power in Canada." Think about that for a second. Ottawa saw Alberta rising and deliberately cut us down, and they've kept cutting. Since 1961, Alberta has sent over $700 billion more to Ottawa than we've received back. That is, and every $3 of that went straight to Quebec. So when we go into negotiations for a sovereign Alberta of the future, and people are wondering, what do we do with our debt? How much do we take on? We've already overpaid $700 billion. That share of the debt does not come back to us. We're actually owed money by our country. Every single year, we lose between $20 and $28 billion. That means that from our taxes, we're overpaying $20 to $28 billion to Ottawa that we're receiving no services back for. And if you break that down to per person in Alberta, that's about $6,000. So for the average family of 4, you are paying $24,000 a year to Ottawa for no services coming back to you. And out of that, about $14 billion goes directly to Quebec. On top of that, Ottawa has blocked pipelines and scared away investment. Since 2006, Alberta has lost $200 billion in projects. That's just in the last 20 years. And when you add the multiplier effect to that, that's $1.25 trillion gone. And because Ottawa won't let us sell oil and gas to the world, Alberta loses another $26.5 billion every single year. Now, when Ottawa needs Alberta, they talk about Team Canada. But let's be honest about Alberta's role on this team. Ottawa's got us locked like in the back in the equipment room, hauling water bottles while they get to play the game. Albertans are told to carry the load for the team and to be quiet about it. But what we're seeing is Albertans don't do quiet. We do honest work, we do solutions, we do community, and now we're going to do sovereignty. Let me put those losses to Team Canada into perspective. $26.5 billion a year could wipe out every single personal income tax in Alberta. It could also double the pensions for every senior. It could build hospitals in every rural community and still leave billions left for schools, roads, and growth. In fact, I actually heard Danielle speaking in Lloydminster at her panel last night, saying the exact same statistics. Instead, though, Ottawa siphons it away. So when people say, why sovereignty? The real question is, how much longer are we willing to be bled dry? Some folks ask, can't we just fix this inside Canada? Can't we cut a better deal? Let's just give Danielle a chance. And you know, I respect and admire our Premier probably as much as anyone. I adore her. And I support any of her efforts to negotiate a stronger place for Alberta within Confederation. But friends, let's be realistic. Albertans have been trying to achieve this for over a century, and every time Ottawa has slammed the door in our face. In 1905, we were brought into Confederation, and it took 25 years even back then for Alberta to finally win control of its resources in 1930, and that was after Ottawa had milked them first. In the 1980s, Premier Lougheed stood up to the National Energy Program, but billions were lost anyways, and Alberta's future was deliberately stifled. Then we get to 1987-1992 time period. We had Meech Lake and Charlottetown Accords. Both were constitutional reform attempts, and both failed. And why? Because changing Canada's constitution is next to impossible, especially for Alberta. In order to change the constitution, say for instance you wanted to end the equalization, the first thing you need is 7 out of 10 provinces have to agree, representing 50% of the population. That's a pretty big feat. Say you pass that, you go on to step number 2, where you need a majority vote in the House of Commons. That's looking a little difficult. Pass that and you go on to step 3, which is a majority vote in the Senate. Even more difficult. But if by some miracle you manage to get through those first 3 steps, the 4th step will get us every time, because Quebec has a veto vote, and they didn't even sign the 1982 Constitution. So to say that we're going to get something put through and have constitutional reform, that's not going to happen. Continuing on our timeline, in the 1990s we had the Reform Party, which was born from, again, Western frustration. They tried pushing for decentralization and Ottawa ignored them. In 2001, we had the Firewall Letter. It called for Alberta to control pensions, policing, taxation, something that 25 years later sounds very familiar to what we're still fighting for. In 2019, we had the Fair Deal Panel. Albertans again asked for fairness, and Ottawa said no. And then in 2021, we had the equalization referendum. 62% of Albertans voted to abolish equalization. But because of the process to do that and opening up the Constitution, it is very easy for Ottawa to just ignore that. So let's be clear, it's not that we haven't tried. We've tried for 120 years, and Ottawa's answer has always been the same: no. That's why sovereignty isn't reckless to me. It's actually responsible. After witnessing the huge swell of support with the momentum of the Conservative movement and Pierre Poilievre leading the helm, and then to see Canada again elect another Liberal government, even after the last 10 years of pain, I think it's become clear that Ottawa will never change. I honestly don't feel that we will ever see another Canadian Conservative government. As someone who used to pursue a sovereign Alberta within Canada, and I really pushed for that when I first joined the APP, I now too realize that the best path for prosperity and freedom for Albertans is to pursue a sovereign Alberta without Canada. So let's bring it home and talk about what a sovereign Alberta means for real Albertans and what it would mean for you. And this is outlined in much more detail in our fully costed fiscal document, The Value of Freedom. And there's copies at the back, and you can download it online. That document walks you through what it costs to run Alberta now and what a sovereign Alberta could look like. And when you see those numbers and the level of prosperity that we've been ignored and left without, it will push you forward in this momentum. For instance, a young family of 4 would keep $20,000 to $25,000 more a year in their pockets. Year 1 of a sovereign Alberta, we could cut income taxes by half, and by year 5, we could eliminate them completely. Seniors would see their pensions double, while contributions could be halved. The lower cost of groceries, power, and fuel, very compelling. Farmers could see the threats of fertilizer restrictions scrapped, the carbon tax gone, input costs slashed. And our kids, our workers, and our professionals would see opportunity right here instead of having to go east or to the south. And what about the ability to create a new Alberta Constitution, voted on and accepted by Albertans? This part, I think, gets me the most excited even, where individual rights and property rights are enshrined, where balanced budgets are law, and no runaway federal debt could be hung over us, with direct democracy and incorporating citizen initiatives, referendum, and recall that actually recalls those who choose to not represent us. Friends, this isn't a gamble. Alberta, sovereign and free, would rank among the top 5 most prosperous nations in the world. In 2006, we had a little taste of it because under Ralph Klein, Alberta had balanced budgets, zero debt, the lowest unemployment, and the strongest economy in Canada. We've proven that Alberta First policies work. Imagine what we could do without Ottawa holding us back. As Ralph Klein said many times, let's not look to Ottawa for solutions, let's look to ourselves. Now, I know some of you are thinking that forging a new nation is scary. We've never done this before, and it is a bit overwhelming. But here's the thing, new nations have been formed hundreds and hundreds of times over history, and they used to be formed with so little as parchment and ink. So surely now, with the ingenuity, the brains of Albertans, and the world's knowledge at our fingertips, this is something that we could do very, very well. And not just form a new country, but the most prosperous and most free nation on the planet. So, how does this actually happen? It's not a pipe dream. There's actually a legal democratic process already underway. Canada is one of the few countries in the world that actually does have a legal process for a province leaving the nation. Under Alberta's Citizens Initiative Act, and with the help of Bill 54, Albertans have the right to force a binding referendum. That means if we gather just over 177,000 signatures on a petition, Elections Alberta is required to certify it and put the question on the ballot. Our proposed referendum question, delivered by Mitch Sylvester, is: do you agree that the province of Alberta shall become a sovereign country and cease to be a province of Canada? Once Albertans vote yes, the decision moves beyond Ottawa's control. It becomes the declared democratic will of the people, and under both Canadian law and international law, it cannot be ignored. What happens next is equally important. Once the vote passes, Alberta would formally declare itself a sovereign nation, and what a great day that will be. And that will trigger the start of a constitutional conference. And that is where Albertans, not federal politicians, are invited to the table to decide the foundations of our new country. The Alberta Prosperity Project has been working on a proposed interim constitution to get us through that transition period, and that will be released really soon for public info and for public feedback. This is just a starting point. It's a draft, and it envisions protecting individual freedoms, enshrining Indigenous treaties, guaranteeing balanced budgets, building a government that answers directly to the people. From there, the Albertans actually themselves get to shape, debate, and ratify the permanent constitution that reflects who we are and the future that we want. At the heart of it all, sovereignty lets us protect what matters most, and that is our faith, our family, and our freedom. So when people ask, can we really do this? The answer is yes. The Clarity Act recognizes our right to a referendum. International law protects that right. And even Canada itself recognized Kosovo in 2008 after nothing more than a referendum. We were the first to recognize them as a sovereign nation. So we don't need permission. We just need Albertans to stand together. Samuel Adams once said, "It does not take a majority to prevail, but rather an irate, tireless minority, keen on setting brush fires of freedom in the minds of men." And friends, you are that brush fire. So here's what I ask of you tonight. Number one, I would love for you to sign your intent to vote yes at albertaprosperityproject.com or on the sign-up sheets at the back. That is just to sign your intent to vote yes. Once our question is approved and we actually are going to get the petition signed, this helps us do it in a very efficient manner because we don't have to go out looking for people to sign it. We know who's excited about it and who's willing to do it. So we can go get your signature in wet ink on that petition, and that will lead us into the referendum. Our goal right now is to have 1 million Albertans signed up. And once we hit that goal, we'll probably raise it to 2 million, because how awesome would it be to come into this referendum being louder and too big to ignore. The second thing is to get 10 other people to also sign up. We need the numbers. We need the strength in numbers. We need to be loud about it. So talk to your families, your neighbors, and your coworkers. And the third thing is just to carry the message forward. Talk to people, wear the merchandise, share the social media posts. Do it with courage and always with civil discourse. Alberta sovereignty, to me, is more than politics. It's about legacy. It's about who we are, what we value, and what we leave behind. And Alberta is most certainly worth this fight. Our faith, our family, and our freedom is certainly worth this fight. And when future generations look back, I want them to see a people who did not bend to Ottawa. I want them to see people who rose, who stood up, and who built a sovereign, prosperous future, even when it was a little bit scary. So thank you, and may Alberta be forever strong and free.
Thank you, Tanya. And if you just stop for a minute, she mentioned all the taxes. We pay carbon tax, GST tax, income tax, fuel tax, excise tax, tax on your tires, property tax, inheritance tax. Now there's supposed to be something on your property. I forget what they call it. Tanner might address it. Yes, right. If that was all gone, just imagine your pockets full of money. Our next speaker is Tanner Hnidey. Tanner is an author, economist, analyst, and owner of TannerKnidey.com. There, he regularly comments on current events and pressing political issues, all while receiving millions of views on his online content every year. And he has some excellent books. I've read 2 of them. I'm excited to be reading the 3rd one. Tanner is also a frequent guest on shows such as Talk Truth, the Sean Newman podcast, and various other media outlets. He has a bachelor's degree in economics, is earning his master's of theology, and lives in Lloydminster with his wife, Paige, who couldn't be with us tonight. They recently celebrated their 1st anniversary. So congratulations, Tanner, and welcome.
I'm a little bit taller than Lorna. Well, thank you all so much for having me come and speak to you today. It is my pleasure to be here. I have not been down here in some time, to be entirely honest. We were in Medicine Hat country yesterday. We've been touring all over, and it's been such a wonderful privilege to be able to explore the entire province and meet so many different people to talk about these so critical of issues. And again, it is my pleasure to be with you tonight. I'm going to make my speech as brief as I possibly can because we have so much to talk about and so little time to talk about it. The topic that I want to bring before you tonight for discussion is perhaps the most common concern, perhaps the most common contention that not only the workers and the volunteers at APP receive daily, but for that matter, it is the most common contention or concern that anyone who is a proponent of independence receives daily. The topic that I want to bring before you tonight, the issue that I want to talk about, is the issue of landlocking. Landlocking in an independent Alberta. And you and I can understand why this topic is an issue, or why it's a concern. You know, Alberta's an economic juggernaut. That's true. Every year, our GDP equals something like $353 billion, with a B. And that number is larger than when the data was last recorded. So we have this heavy, hard, impressive economy that, when you look at Alberta's output, its GDP per capita trumps every other province in the country. Like, it's true that, you know, Ontario has, in terms of gross numbers, a larger GDP than Alberta does. They produce some $859-ish billion every year worth of GDP, compared to Alberta's 350 some. But when you look at the numbers per capita, you see that Alberta produces about $71,000 per person, compared to Ontario's $55,000 per person. So to say that Alberta punches above its weight economically is an understatement. It's an understatement that's clear and obvious to all of us, and it also means that for our province, just as it is for all the other provinces in the country, trade is absolutely critical. You know, we produce all of these goods and services. We produce all of this in our Alberta economy, but it's not as though we keep everything that we produce right here at home. No, instead, we trade it all over the place. Every single year, Alberta exports a total of $259 billion worth of goods. $183 billion of those dollars are exported internationally to various other countries. And similarly, Alberta imports about $112 billion every single year. Internationally, that number is about $73 billion. We get about $73 billion worth of international goods flowing into our province annually. So we are this machine of an economy that is pushing out goods at an incredible rate and is bringing goods in at an impressive rate, leading to the quality of life that we are able to lead today. And this is why I completely understand the concern with landlocking, with an independent Alberta. You see, the argument goes something like this. The argument says, well, here we are in Alberta right now, but if we were independent, we would be landlocked, and therefore we would not be able to trade with the same efficacy or the same efficiency or in the same quantities that we are right now. Our trade would suffer, and therefore our economy would suffer as well. Therefore, an independent Alberta must be an impossible Alberta. It must be an Alberta that cannot exist. Now, you might be expecting me to stand up here tonight before you, and you might be expecting me to talk in opposition to the idea that an independent Alberta would be landlocked. You might be expecting me to stand up here and say, oh no, an independent Alberta wouldn't be landlocked, but that's not what I'm going to do. Instead, I'm going to do something entirely different. You see, when you listen to those commentators talk about their concern with an independent Alberta being landlocked, should it become independent, I fear that those commentators too often omit the fact that an Alberta within Canada, an Alberta right now, is already landlocked. So what I'm going to do tonight is admit the fact. I'm going tonight to admit the fact and say, yes, an independent Alberta would be landlocked. Just look at a map. Look at a map right now, a Canadian map. You will notice that Alberta has no port on its left side. It has no port on its right side, not immediately. And it has no port on its north or south side. No, instead we are surrounded by land. We're surrounded by land in all directions. And unless something drastic changes in the future, believe it or not, it's going to stay that way. So you see, the question then is not so much would an independent Alberta be landlocked? That's a non sequitur. Alberta's already landlocked. Alberta, geographically, is landlocked within Canada right now. That's always the way it's been. And again, that's always the way it's going to be into the foreseeable future. Therefore, the question changes. The question I'm going to address tonight changes. The proper question to ask is this. Considering that an Alberta within Canada is landlocked, considering that an independent Alberta would also be geographically landlocked, considering that both iterations of Alberta are landlocked, what is the best, most efficient, proper way to navigate that landlocking? Is it better and more efficient for us to do so within Canada, as we have it right now, or is it more efficient for us to navigate the landlocking issue independent of Canada on our own? Well, you don't even need me up here. That's the question I want to address quickly tonight. And how are we going to address it? Well, we are going to begin with a very brief analysis of what an Alberta within Canada looks like right now. How does it navigate its landlocking reality as it stands today? Here's what it can do, and here's what Alberta does. First, you can trade with a neighbor internationally that does not require a port to reach. And indeed, this is what Alberta does. We have one superpower of a neighbor to our south. You, as a province, can trade with America. You can trade with the USA. And that is what happens. I told you at the start of this speech that Alberta exports internationally some $182 billion every single year. And that's true. What I did not tell you is that 90% of those international exports, about $167 billion worth of goods, are exported not east, not west, not north, but south to America. Already, as it stands, we export 90% of our goods to America. And those exports do not move by sea. No, predominantly they move by truck, by train, rail, and by plane. And of course, by pipeline. The dominant international trading partner, and it's not even close, for Alberta is America. And so the importance of this means, as you know, that Alberta wants to sign some trade deals. We like trade deals with America. We want to keep trade as free as possible between those two countries. We would like our trade to be seamless, to be smooth, so that investors can have confidence about what's going to happen in the years to come, that they might be able to make projections and invest, therefore, as they see fit. Here comes the problem. Come join me. You're doing wonderful. As it stands in Canada, as it stands right now, it's not as though the provinces, Alberta included, meet with Americans, with the American administration, to negotiate trade deals for Alberta, on Alberta's behalf. That is not a privilege, that is not a right given to us under the Canadian Constitution. Instead, according to Section 132 and Section 91 of the Constitution, that right is reserved for Ottawa. Ottawa, supposedly, represents us in trade discussions. All international trade deals, all international trade treaties are governed, are negotiated, are discussed, are signed, not by we here in Alberta, even though they affect us very greatly, but by Ottawa. That's the way Confederation is set up. So you see, it might be, as it is right now with CUSMA, that there is not an explicit ban on the cool-style beef packaging that harmed Alberta ranchers for so many years there in the 2010s. There's not an explicit ban on beef labeling and so on in America. They don't have it right now, but there's no law that says it can't come back. And it might be that we don't like that, we don't, but there's nothing we can do about it. It's not as though we can go to the president and say, we are considering or would like an amendment to this deal. Would you be amenable to this? Similarly, it's not as though right now in CUSMA there is a guarantee of pipeline infrastructure in America? No. But it's not as though Alberta, even though we want that, can approach the president and his administration and say, can we change the deal to look like this? That isn't our right. That's Ottawa's right. But of course, you and I know how Ottawa works. You see, the fact of the matter is that the best we can do in Alberta right now, the best we've ever been able to do with trade deals, international trade deals, is see what Ottawa is considering signing, look at what's written in the deal, return to Ottawa and say, we wonder if we could change this and that to better reflect our Alberta interests, and then watch as Ottawa does the complete opposite. That's the way it's been. And unless something changes, that's the way it's going to be. So that's one option we have right now. We can trade with our neighbors down south, but Ottawa governs the trade. Secondly, what can we do? Well, we can also trade to our neighbors east and west of us that also don't require a port to reach. We can trade with the provinces. We can trade with Ontario. We can trade with Saskatchewan. We can trade with Manitoba and BC and so on. And indeed, we do. Some $76 billion, some $39 billion of Alberta's imports are from our neighbors east and west of us. And similarly, our exports between our neighbors east and west of us equal about $76 billion. So this also is an important aspect of Alberta's economy, and it's a good aspect of it. I like trade between myself and BC. I like trade between myself and Saskatchewan, or myself and Ontario. That's wonderful. Let us push out our goods there, and let's receive the goods that they are efficient in creating back here at home. Fine, so be it. But of course, once again, there is a problem. Just as international trade is governed by Ottawa, provincial trade is governed by Ottawa. So let's suppose that Alberta is unhappy with certain conditions or aspects of the way other provinces are treating us, for whatever reason. Let's use, for example, of course, oil. That's the classic example. And we want to change our economic fortunes within Canada. It is not as though we are allowed to exercise any serious or credible economic muscle to try and generate a better quality of life for ourselves and for fellow Canadians. It isn't possible. And I'll give you an example. So, of course, we want to get oil to port. BC does not want to allow us to get to port. So in response, the UCP some years ago drafted and signed Bill 12. And Bill 12, as a general overview, says this. It says, we're going to put a license on shipping oil. So if an oil company wants to ship oil out of the province, it has to approach the government for a license. And if the government says, no, you're not getting a license, then no oil can be shipped. In effect, you turn off the taps. Now that bill was passed, and almost immediately as it was passed, it was challenged in the courts. And the courts have ruled that it's practically unusable. It isn't allowable under the Canadian Constitution. So Bill 12 has been shelved, it's never been used, and it has been rendered practically inert. We do not have these opportunities within Canada when trading with our domestic provinces to exercise some economic muscle. It's not as though we can put a tariff on every good crossing from the east to BC, or vice versa. It's not as though we can put some cost on, say, using Alberta's airspace. It's Canada's airspace. And, as I mentioned, when it comes to trade between the provinces, Canada governs it. That's Section 121 of the Constitution. And bear in mind, if this were unlocked, we would have an incredible ability to do so. I know that we are in cattle country down here. And of course, Alberta's beef industry dwarfs any other beef industry in the country. Every year we export $5 billion worth of beef. Now granted, that is shrinking as a consequence of various policies that we strongly resist. But nevertheless, we still have this massive export of beef. Domestically, 36% of those exports, about $2.4 billion, go to not Saskatchewan or Ontario, but Quebec. And the same is true with our oil. An incredible amount is shipped out east, but we're not able to do anything with it, to exercise any muscle, because it's governed by, once again, Ottawa. Finally, what can we do? We can trade with our neighbors to the south. We can trade with our neighbors east and west, but both cases are governed by Ottawa. Finally, we can negotiate our way to a port. We can trade with international countries. In particular, I'm thinking of the Asiatic markets, the Asian markets, and we can send them our goods and services. And again, in particular, I'm thinking of oil. Right now, the Asian markets are hungry for Alberta power, for Alberta energy. They want it. They would take oil and gas right now, absolutely, no doubt about it. And we have been sending a little bit more there lately, but they can handle even more. We have an opportunity here to increase our quality of life and increase their quality of life as well. But of course, it's not as though you can just send that oil by plane. You have to, and certainly not by a solar-powered plane. You have to send it by tanker. And in order to send it by tanker, you have to get it to the coast by pipeline. That is the cheapest, most efficient, most effective, and safest way to do so. And this is once again where the struggle introduces itself. Alberta wanted to ship some 1.1 million barrels of oil every single day to the Eastern Bloc, Energy East Pipeline. It was canceled by the federal government. Alberta wanted to ship some 525,000 barrels of oil every single day to a refinery in Kitimat, where that oil would be refined and then loaded up onto a tanker and sent to the Asian markets. And the federal government canceled it. Trans Mountain, yeah, I know that was built, but when you look at the numbers, after government took it over, it cost at least 5 times as much to build as was initially projected. So that is not a viable solution to this problem. All of these pipelines, all of these possible projects canceled because of all of these economic regulations that are totally nonsensical and drive investment and production out of the country. So much uncertainty into the markets. And we say, well, that's costing us a lot of money. Suppose a pipeline would generate $1 billion every year, just for ease of arithmetic. Wow, that's an incredible amount of money. Yes, it is. But I have a bit of time, so I'm going to explain to you how much more money it is when you approach it from an economic principle known as opportunity cost. So as Lorna mentioned, my wife could not be with us tonight. It's a tragedy she couldn't be here, and she normally comes with me to these events, but she had to stay home. But if she were here, we would be sitting at the back there at the little table, and you and your spouse might have turned around and looked at us, and you would have said to your spouse, wow, she is very pretty, and he is very not. And then you would have said, how on earth did he marry a girl of this caliber, of this quality? And you might have had a back and forth discussion. You might have even come up and asked me yourself. So I'm going to tell you how I did it. I did it like so. Before we were dating, still in that adventurous phase, I was trying to woo this girl, to get her to like me. As every gentleman in the audience knows, it's a difficult thing to do. And I recognized the problem that you recognize, which is how pretty Paige is, and how I look like me. And so I decided to, one morning, go to Coffee Row. I go to coffee with Dad and my brother lots of mornings when I'm not out traveling, where all the old farmers and oil workers congregate to, insatiate my mind. That's not the right word. To saturate. That's the word. My mind with all of their wisdom. And I said to them one morning, I said, there's this lady I like, boys, and I want to get her to like me. What should I do? You see, I solicited their advice, which was a mistake, but I did it. And they said, give us a second, and then they turned around and they congregated over coffee, and they talked for a couple of minutes, and then they turned back around, returned from their counsel. And they said, here's what you do. If you want to get this girl to like you, which you do, you should take her on a picnic. Girls love picnics. Everyone loves picnics. You take her on a romantic picnic. You tell her how you feel about her on that picnic, and she'll be yours forever. We guarantee it. So I said, great idea, fantastic. And of course, me being Ukrainian, I quickly rushed to the superstore to grab some kubasa and some cheese and crackers for our little, yes, Stanici's is better, you're right, for our little picnic. I phoned up Paige. I said, I want to take you on a little date. We're going to go on a picnic, but it's going to be later in the evening. She said, oh my. I said, yes. So I pick her up, and we start driving to our destination. And she said, where are you taking us? Where are we going? And I said, oh, it's a surprise. It's very romantic. So you have to close your eyes. Cover your eyes. And I said, when we're at the destination, I'll tell you. Open them up. And so we're driving and driving and driving. And I don't know about down here, but in Lloydminster, we have two predominant industries. The first is canola crushing. We have ADM up there. And the second industry, of course, is heavy oil. We have a massive upgrader in Lloyd where we refine, some of the heaviest oil in the world, as a matter of fact. But every night, that upgrader lights itself up like a Christmas tree. And it looks like this scenic picture of downtown Calgary. And so we're driving, and she opens up her eyes. I say, we're here, you can look. And she looks, and she goes, where have you taken me? And I said, we're at the upgrader to look at the lights, as we have Stanici's and cheese and crackers. So she sits down on the blanket beside me, and of course she's forcing a smile, but she's being very sweet about it. And we have our little picnic. And after that's said and done, it's time to, drop her back off. So we get in the car, and we're driving. And we're driving on the road, and she asks me, just out of curiosity, she says, how much did that picnic tonight cost us? Cost you, I guess. What did it cost you? And I said, are you Ukrainian? And I did the math. I started calculating. 2 and carry the 1, or whatever it is, and all that jazz. And then I said, well, between gas and food and tires, they'll have to wear out eventually. That picnic tonight cost us about $100. $100 total. And she said, well, that's not too bad at all, actually. So then I went, now I know you're not Ukrainian. But anyway, she said, it's not bad. I says, yeah, it's not too bad. And so we keep driving. We drive a bit further, and then I start to think to myself a little bit more. And as I'm thinking, and I slow the car down. Pull over where, the semis go and check their Super Bs and so on. Pull over, and I said, wait a second. I just thought of something. So it's true that tonight the picnic explicitly cost me $100. That's fair, that's accurate. But then I told Paige, suppose that we didn't go on a picnic tonight. And suppose that instead of spending this $100 on a picnic, I took it and I put it in a high-yield savings account. Let's suppose I put it into a mutual fund. Say it's earning 7 or 8%. And I let that mutual fund grow over 10, 20, 30, and 40 years. So that when you and I retired, we would have had, because of compound interest, some $2,000 to use at our disposal. So I said to her, tonight's picnic did not cost $100. Tonight's picnic cost $100 plus the $2,000 that we would have had if we put that $100 into a mutual fund. Tonight's picnic cost us $2,100. She went, this is why all you economists are single. And by miracle, she married me anyway. But nevertheless, the story is fictional, thank heavens. The principle behind it is not. Let's suppose a pipeline is canceled. It costs Alberta $1 billion a year in canceled revenue. That's a lot of money. Think about how much more money it is when you consider the opportunity cost of that pipeline, that lost $1 billion. What could we have done with that $1 billion? It could have been reinvested. It could have been used to build new jobs, to create new jobs for hardworking Albertans who would then go and use their money elsewhere, save or pay for their child's education or who knows what. could have been used to reinvest into the local economy. Who knows how it could have been used, but it would have been used. So when we say that the cost to losing these energy projects, especially overseas, and of course down south too, like with Keystone, is only so and so and such amount, explicitly that's true. When you look at the implicit costs, it's so much higher. And there's nothing we can do about it. We don't have any ability to flex that muscle I was talking about. You see, the picture I have painted for you tonight of the Alberta and Alberta within Canada is a picture, a factual picture of an Alberta that does not have leverage. We have no leverage in this country. We've never had leverage in the country. That's the way the country's been designed. It's been designed to maintain, to concentrate power in the East, and it is concentrated there. Power is not concentrated in the West. Power is concentrated in Ottawa. It is not concentrated in Calgary or in Edmonton. So Ottawa will do what's best for Ottawa. And what is best for Ottawa? Well, they know that if they're going to maintain their position of power, they have to win either Ontario, Quebec, or some combination of the two. So they will, time and time again, as they have proven throughout history, appease those two provinces. Focus on them first, and leave the West to vote as it pleases, because the election is called by 8 o'clock before Alberta's results are even are on the TV. That's the way it stands. But what if you were independent? What would happen if Alberta were independent of Canada? What would our leverage look like then? Well, let's look at our American example. We would still trade with America. Of course, why not? Absolutely. Think of the quality of life that we achieve by trading with them, and vice versa for America as well. They need our oil. And actually, President Trump proved it by not hammering our oil and gas with that 25% tariff. He knew he had to restrict it, lest gas prices down south skyrocket. So we would continue trading with America with one exceptional difference. For the first time in Alberta's history, Alberta would be free to negotiate trade deals with America for itself, by Albertans and for Albertans in order to benefit Alberta and all others who are involved in that trade, that we might be unshackled and freed from the regulation and the foreign policy that is right now dominated and set by Ottawa to our detriment. And instead, we would approach these trade deals from a new position, a new angle of we want everyone to benefit. We don't want to show the Americans what's what, show them who's who, hit them on the jaw with our elbow, you know? That isn't the way to approach it, no. Let's approach it, and we would approach it with dignity and with honesty and with an intention to make sure that our trade between our nation and America would be as free as it could possibly be for the first time in our history. Secondly, regarding trade with Canada, again, that would continue. Why would it not? The provinces need our product, and we want the other provinces' product. Again, that's a wonderful thing, excellent. But, as I mentioned before, unlike what we have right now, it's not as though Alberta would be governed by Ottawa's rules and regulations. It's not as though the Supreme Court could talk to us here in Alberta and say, oh, you don't have the right to do this or that. You don't have the right to impose that policy. No, we would be separated from Canada's Supreme Court and from Canada's laws. We would be our own. We would be our own nation with our own constitution and our own set of laws. And so you could, I'm not saying you should, that's a totally separate conversation, but you could, if you had to, if you wanted to, if you were government, put a tariff on goods coming from the Vancouver port going east, or vice versa. You could, well, again, you got to be careful how much you say at these events, lest one of our friends from the media be in the audience. But nevertheless, you could put a tax on airspace. You would have all of these tools available to you that are not presently available to Alberta right now. Because we would be, again, freed from those regulations that right now govern us. And finally, what about international trade? What about trade with other countries? Would that change at all? What would that look like? What would it look like trying to ship our oil to port so we can get it to the Asian markets, to the Asian countries? What about our beef and grain and so on? What exactly would that look like? Well, how would we negotiate those deals? I've just painted the picture for you. We would have control over our own trade with America. We could use that as leverage. If Canada won't play ball, fine, we'll approach the Americans and ask to use their port and make a deal there. Or if Canada, again, refuses to play ball or might just be trying to play hardball, we could enact those tools that we have, or would have, if we were independent, governing trade between the provinces. We would have all of these new opportunities available to us that we do not have available to us right now. You would even have the legal right, and again, I'm not saying you should do this due to uncertainty and so on, but you would have the legal right to control the flow of oil out of your province. Ottawa would no longer control it as they do right now with international pipelines. That's Ottawa's control, not ours, not Alberta's. All of these new tools available to us for the first time. And not only so, but of course, if Alberta were its own nation, it would be subject to segments of the UN Treaty on the Sea. Here's what it says, for example. This is from UN Article 125. Landlocked countries, which is what Alberta would be, have the right of access to and from the sea. With our pipelines, we don't have that right of access right now, obviously. Secondly, Article 127, no customs or duties shall be imposed on such a nation. That is, it's not as though Canada could tax our oil at 50% if it went through BC to the coast. And finally, transit states, Canada, and landlocked states, Alberta, shall cooperate in the formulation of rules. It's not as though Canada would set the terms of the agreement. No, instead, it would have to be set between Alberta and Canada. But to be entirely honest, even though these articles exist in the UN, I have absolutely zero desire whatsoever to put my faith or my hope and trust in that institution. So I do not for one moment want to say that this is what's going to happen because the UN exists. You know, you look at what they've done and you look at their historical failure to supposedly maintain the good, the rules that they're trying to uphold, and you realize they are a corrupted institution, and they are the last institution I would put Alberta's future in the hands of. So that's why I told you what I did before, that even if those UN treaties and laws and articles failed, even if they were completely moot, you would still have the ability and would negotiate with America. You would still have the ability and would negotiate with Canada on your own terms. We would be an equal partner at the table compared to what we have now, being told by Ottawa what to do, like a parent telling his or her child what to do. The only difference is that parents love their children, and Ottawa has no love for us. So, knowing all of this, it is true that there are still many who say that Alberta cannot pursue this future. Alberta can't pursue this new and magnificent objective because a future trying to navigate this reality is a hard future. It's an uncertain future. And our response is, well, of course it's uncertain, it's the future. That's what makes it the future. But not only so, maybe such a future would be hard. Maybe it will be hard to achieve. My conviction is that a future under this Ottawa government will be so much harder. We have done this for too long. We have tried everything else, absolutely everything else. And so instead, I look at what's happening in the country, I look at what we have here tonight, and I say to myself, Ottawa has, for too long, been able to swing a sledgehammer, while Alberta has been forced to wield a feather, and I think that time is over. I think that time is up. I think it's time we begin negotiating for ourselves as Albertans. I think it's time we built an Alberta for Albertans that works for Albertans. I think it's time we approach negotiations with a new mindset and with a new ability to walk into the future as Albertans, not governed by Ottawa. And I think it's time that we do what's best for ourselves, our parents, our grandparents, our children, our grandchildren, and our entire posterity to come. Thank you.
So. Okay, at this time we'll have our volunteers pass around the buckets. And I'd also like to mention the signs around that are on the walls. One specifically, we have the recording is happening tonight, if you didn't realize it. This event is being recorded by Freedom Calendar. That's Max. And so the posters at the front are the websites and locations that this recording will be available. So if you know someone that couldn't make it tonight, direct them to that location, spread it around far and wide. I'd also like to mention that Alberta Prosperity Project is promoting September 1st, which is this coming Monday, as Alberta Day. So check out your Facebook groups, because there are things going on in different locations. If you want to take a drive down to Claire's home, on the north end at the Top Hand Western store, from 4:30 to 6:30, we're going to have hot dogs. We're going to have just people gather and fly our Alberta flags and be proud to be Albertans. Our next speaker is Mr. Jeffrey Rath. Jeffrey Rath is a constitutional lawyer with over 2 decades of experience. He is a leader in his field with his expertise and knowledge, having been pivotal in representing the First Nations communities and his representation in constitutional law for our Indigenous leaders. He is General Counsel on the APP board and is a leader and support of Alberta independence. He has fought many constitutional court battles and won. And if there's anyone I want in my court, it's this man. So help me welcome Jeff Rath.
Thank you very much. I got it. That's a lot easier. So, anyway, it's nice to look out there tonight and see so many people coming out on a Thursday night on such a beautiful summer evening. So thank you guys for coming out. Give yourselves a big round of applause. It's a really great turnout. The other thing I'm happy to see is all the husbands and wives out there. It reminds me of a story I heard not too long ago at a Ukrainian wedding up in St. Michael's, Alberta. And the old guy's up there at his 50th wedding anniversary. And he says, people have been asking me what the secret is to 50 years of successful marriage. He says, I'll tell you right now. Day one, I laid down the law. I told her from now on, she could make all the little decisions. I'd make all the big ones. And he says, the secret to 50 years of successful marriage, I've never had to make a big decision. So anyway, for all the wives out there, please encourage your husband, your family, your children, everybody else to make the little decision to when you see the referendum question, do you agree that Alberta should become a sovereign country and cease to be a province in Canada, that all of you and your family members vote yes to that question? Because that's what we're trying, that's where we're all trying to go, right? And I think the other thing I wanted to talk about tonight is the urgency of this project that we're undertaking and why it is that we need to get this done as quickly as possible. I think it's clear, and I mean we've all been living through it for the last 5 years, right, or more, the Liberals in Ottawa and Mark Carney are a clear present danger and an existential threat to the province of Alberta and every person in this room. There's no other way to put it. And again, my friend Tanner Hnidey could, speak to this probably, better than I can as an economist. But one of the things I want everybody to internalize, and we all see it every day when we go to the grocery store, it's like if you say, gee, everything seems like it costs twice as much as it did 5 years ago. Grapefruit, a single grapefruit, $7. The price of meat. You almost need to take out a mortgage to buy a steak anymore, right? And of course, the reason that everything seems like it costs twice as much is for a very simple reason. Mark Carney, as the sneaky, I don't see any tender age children here, sneaky son of a bitch that he is, as a central banker, right, got together with all the other central bankers, right, and this was the advice that he was giving Trudeau and giving the Bank of Canada, the Bank of England, the Central Bank of Europe, etc., and the Federal Reserve in the United States. So they all ran up massive amounts of debt during COVID, keeping people home, keeping them on welfare, giving all of our kids $2,000 a month to, buy surfboards and paddleboards and kayaks and bikes and all the other crap that all that money was getting spent on, right? So anyway, all of that money they wasted during COVID, they needed to recoup. So what did all the central bankers do to recoup that money? They doubled the money supply. So in the last 5 years, the M2 money supply in Canada has doubled, right? And of course, the reason that people haven't really noticed, they go, oh, well, this is global inflation, right? All the other central banks did it in lockstep. So what happens when from an economic perspective, when you double the amount of something, right? It's worth half as much. So all this so-called international inflation, that we're being told about, oh no, it's not just Canada, it's not crappy economic policy in Canada, it's everywhere in the world. It's because a cabal of about 5 or 6 of these guys got together and all agreed to double the money supply of all of these countries, right? So that they could pay off all of the COVID debt that they ran up with all these questionable social programs that none of us needed. All we needed through COVID was to be left the hell alone and let to continue working the way that we've always worked and, give people that are sick the simple message, stay home, or if you're really sick, go to the hospital. But we didn't need to shut down the planet. We didn't need to lock people in their homes. This is the first time in history that we had a quarantine where healthy people were being locked in their homes and healthy people were told that they needed to stay home. This was like Trudeau-dominated, Liberal-dominated idiocy run rampant. And of course, Jason Kenney, who all of us got together and threw out on his ass as Premier of Alberta, right? We were all involved in that, right? Was basically governing like a Trudeau Liberal. He accomplished that rarest of all political feats because he didn't want to annoy all the Karens and all the left-wingers in the NDP that wanted people locked up harder and, quarantined harder and, oh no, 1 mask isn't enough, you should wear 5, all of that foolishness, right? He was, so he didn't want to annoy any of those people. So, he brought in these rules that literally where he tried to cut the baby in half all the time and went straight down the, and equally accomplished the rarest of all political feats, which was to anger everybody equally on both sides of the issue. Without, of course, remembering that we were the ones that elected him in the first place, right? And again, this is the foolishness and the idiocy, that we've been dealing with on an ongoing basis from all these, pseudo-liberals, and I would say almost quasi-communists that we have in power now in Ottawa that we need to get away from, right? So, one of the things, of course, that I want people to think about, of course, I don't know if any of you caught it or not, but it was like 3-4 months ago, we had, Premier Legault of Quebec say, oh, well, Alberta can't separate, it doesn't have its own culture. There's no Alberta culture. They don't have poutine the way we have poutine. Don't have tourtière. We have tourtière, but Alberta has no culture. Well, of course, that's pure BS. Everybody here, identifies as an Albertan. We all know what it means to be an Albertan. It's a really strong connection to this province. We couldn't imagine living anywhere else in the world. And as a people, right, we all share very, common collective traits. We want to wake up early in the morning. We want to go to work. We want to we want to earn money to take care of our kids. We want to raise strong families and strong children with good moral values, who want to, have their own families and earn, a living and take care of their children and take care of their parents and grandparents, et cetera, right? That's Alberta culture. And then on top of it, as a people, we want and expect government to stay the hell out of our lives, right? And when governments break that basic agreement, as a people, we rise up and we throw the bums out, as we showed Jason Kenney, right? That was the basic social compact. You leave us alone, we'll continue to tolerate the vague whiff of corruption that floats around you, like that sort of your downwind from a septic tank on a hot summer day, that we get from members of the, the members of the Kenney government and Kenney cabinet ministers. We'll tolerate that, but we expect you to honor and respect our rights and not interfere in our lives or the lives of our families, period. But of course, what we've got now is we live in a country where these rights are being ignored on a daily basis, and every single day that we turn around, we're finding new ways and new things that the government of Canada is doing to destroy our culture and to destroy our way of life, right? One of the big ones in Alberta, and we've all seen it, is mass immigration, right? So, I think all of us remember last summer, I know you live in God's country and you don't have to put up with the foolishness of Calgary, but my ranch is close enough to Calgary that I follow the idiocy that goes on in that city on a regular basis, right? So last summer, Calgary didn't have enough water because they were too busy building bicycle lanes so people could ride their bikes at minus 40 than they were to maintain basic infrastructure to keep water going to people's homes, right? So there wasn't enough water in Calgary. We don't have enough houses in Calgary. We don't have enough hospital beds in Calgary, right? We don't have enough jobs in Calgary. The unemployment rate now in Calgary is over 8%, right? Youth unemployment in Calgary this summer, over 14%, right? We're in a recession, but all the crooked mainstream media won't report on it because they don't want to make Marxist Carney look bad, right? So this is where we're living now. So we have shortages of everything. 2 winters ago when it hit minus 50, which if you Google that, it's really hard to find because they still want to pretend that we're engaged in a period of global warming, which I don't think any of us felt at minus 50, but oh well, right? At minus 50, the entire provincial power grid almost collapsed because we didn't have enough electricity. Yet every time we turn around, there's another 100,000, 150,000, immigrants being shipped to Alberta where we don't have enough jobs, we don't have enough water, we don't have enough power, we don't have enough hospital beds, and we don't have enough housing. But these idiots in Ottawa want to destroy our culture and the culture of this province, right? By literally flooding us with people that don't speak our language, don't meet former, immigration standards, where, when we're talking about bringing in skilled workers, these were, doctors, people with PhDs, people that, could teach, welding at the university level beyond anything available in the province, et cetera, et cetera. And now the idea of skilled workers is people to come to the province to take jobs away from our kids to work at Tim Hortons, McDonald's, and fast food restaurants. And the province is being flooded with them. It's all part and parcel of an ongoing liberal plan to destroy our culture and destroy our way of life. And by voting yes to independence in Alberta, we will take ourselves out from underneath that paradigm. And that's why, we say that it's an urgent matter that we do this. It's time once and for all to hang a big no vacancy sign on the province of Alberta so that we can accommodate all of the people that are here now and make sure that everybody has housing, everybody has jobs, that we stop this ongoing increase in the price of rents and apartments and the rest of it, so that our kids can't afford to leave home because they can't afford rents that are being driven up by having to compete with so-called refugees coming into this country that are paid $88,000 a year as refugees. I don't know if anybody else saw it the other day, but apparently the immigration system in this country is so screwed up that in the last 6 months, we've accepted 247 refugees from the United States of America, right, who were LGBTQ people claiming that they feared persecution and death from Donald Trump, right? And our refugee judges, our immigration judges, allowed them to stay and are paying them all $88,000 a year. So think about that. I mean, that's how screwed up, the country is right now. The other thing that I want people to focus on is all of the ongoing so-called climate change foolishness, right? Every time we turn around, we're basically being told that we're all going to die, that climate change is an existential threat. I mean, when the Supreme Court of Canada, and we'll come to that in a minute, ruled in the carbon tax reference that they're going to completely ignore the division of powers under the Constitution, giving the province exclusive jurisdiction over resources and resource development in the province, and allow the federal government to impose the stupid carbon tax on Albertans, the decision from the Supreme Court, which I've read, starts off something along the lines of, well, climate change is an existential threat to the planet. And because climate change is an existential threat to the planet, it's an existential threat to Canada, which makes it an emergency, so we can suspend the constitutional norms and the normal division of powers, and on this basis, we will allow the government of Canada to impose punitive taxes on Canadians and Albertans on the belief that taxes will change the weather, right? I mean, it's just one of the most ridiculous things that I've ever heard, right? I mean, it reminded me, it's this form of magical thinking that literally takes us back to the days of the ancient Mayans and the ancient Aztecs, where, primitive shaman with obsidian knives were cutting the hearts out of victims on the tops of pyramids in the belief that cutting the heart out of working men and women would make it rain, right? Well, we're in the same circumstance where we have governments that literally believe, governments in Ottawa that literally believe that by taxing working men and women to death, it's going to change the weather. Nothing could be more ridiculous. This is the government that we have in Ottawa, right? The other thing is that I want everybody to internalize is that all of this climate change nonsense is one of the biggest frauds that's ever been perpetrated against the human race. We have this cabal of billionaires that gets together every year in this place called Davos in Switzerland under the auspices of a group called the World Economic Forum. Keep in mind, they run the government in Ottawa, but none of them are elected, right? So there are all of these billionaires that get together every year who literally discuss how they're going to front-run investments into uneconomical industries that only work or function with massive influxes of tax dollars out of all of your pockets, right? None of these industries work without massive government subsidies that we all pay for, like hydrogen plants in Newfoundland, bug plants, protein plants in Ontario, $15 billion of Alberta money taken out of Alberta to fund a battery plant in Ontario to build batteries that nobody wants, and the plant now sits mothballed because Volkswagen walked away from the deal after having $15 billion stolen from Albertans to fund this stupid idea, right? Now, look at what's going on in Alberta, right? We have all of these World Economic Forum types, engineering firms that supposedly can build nuclear reactors, but can't do the math to figure out that climate change is bullshit, right? So they want to come to Alberta, and actually the pilot plant for this, and I couldn't imagine anybody doing this. The pilot project for this was a $5 billion U.S. carbon sucking machine built in Utah. Right? With U.S. tax dollars, right? Well, not to be outdone, Mark Carney now wants to build a $50 billion carbon-sucking machine in the middle of the Alberta oil sands to literally suck CO2 out of the air, compress it into liquid CO2, put it in a pipeline, and pipe it to my friend Mitch Sylvester's backyard near Bonnyville Coal Lake, and put it back in the ground near Bonnyville Coal Lake, right? I promise you that is the only pipeline that Mark Carney is going to build for us, right? So instead of spending, $10 or $15 billion on, another pipeline to the West Coast, or simply going to the U.S. and say, hey, we'd like another couple pipelines down south, one to Texas, one through, Montana, Idaho, and Washington to port in Washington, D.C. If, David Eby doesn't want one through B.C., instead of doing that, we have $50 billion being spent on a giant carbon sucking machine that does absolutely nothing to enhance the economic future of the province of Alberta, right? The other one I want people to think about and internalize is what, and again, I have nothing against nuclear power, right? But that being said, when somebody tells me, the minute somebody tells me that somebody is doing something because it's carbon neutral or carbon friendly, I immediately start questioning their motives and start questioning how much sense this whole thing makes, right? So let's think about this idea that somehow or other we need nuclear energy in the province of Alberta. Well, why is the only reason that we need it? Right? It's because politicians and people are buying into this stupid notion that somehow or other there's this magic line in the sky that says if we get past 440 parts per million of CO2 in the atmosphere, that somehow or other we're all going to die and the planet's going to come to an end. It's pure nonsense, right? I would encourage all of you, if you can, Google it. There's a Professor William Happer, who's a climate professor from Princeton University, who has a really great 45-minute presentation on YouTube. And he shows, and again, this guy was involved, knows so much about the atmosphere and science and reflection of the atmosphere. He was the one that was involved in designing the modulating lasers for the Star Wars project, right? That would actually tune themselves so they could keep the beams tight to knock missiles out of the sky. So he understands how the upper atmosphere works, right? So, using scientific formula and graphs, demonstrates that if we were to double CO2 production, or double the CO2 in the atmosphere, guess how much it would increase global temperature? Not even 1 degree, 1%, right? Which basically on a global scale is completely unmeasurable. We are being sold a complete bill of goods on this issue, but all of our public policy, trillions of dollars are being taken away from us, all because of this climate nonsense. Do people remember, 4 months ago or 5 months ago when Trudeau II was still king of Canada, and the Germans and the Japanese came here and said, hey, we'd like some Alberta liquid natural gas, please. Oh no, there's no business case for that. No business case for that. Well, not a month ago, right? President Trump was rightly bragging about the fact that the trade deal that he did with Japan and Germany included a liquid natural gas deal that was worth $750 billion to the United States of America, right? So that's the no business case for that. In effect, Trudeau and the Liberals, and keep in mind, Trudeau did nothing without Carney's involvement or advice, right? They stole another $750 billion from all of us in this province that could have gone, through royalties and whatever else, into building more hospitals, providing more power generation, all of those types of things. Think about the fact that the Montney gas field in northeastern Alberta and northeastern British Columbia has now been recalibrated and resurveyed from a reservoir engineering perspective to now hold 400 trillion cubic feet of natural gas. It's one of the largest gas fields in the entire world. There is enough gas in the Montney gas field, right? And again, keep in mind, this is made in Alberta technology. We all have heard of cogeneration plants and understand, you can use natural gas to make steam to make electricity, right? It's not rocket science, right? This is proven technology in Alberta. Using cogen plants, we could immediately double, right, the power grid in Alberta, right? And we have enough natural gas to run them and, at double or triple Alberta's current power consumption rates for over 1,000 years. Think about that. So why the hell are we building nuclear power plants in Alberta? Well, let me tell you why we're building nuclear power plants in Alberta. Who's one of the leading investors now in small modular nuclear reactor technology and nuclear power in Canada? Brookfield, right? So when Carney says that next year he wants to bankrupt all of our car dealerships by forcing them to take 20% of their inventory every year into an ever-increasing number of EVs that nobody wants, right? Because we all know they can't go more than 100 kilometers on a minus 30 day. And of course, what's the biggest draw for power from anything electric? The heater, right? So basically, Carney wants us all forced to buy vehicles that won't go more than 100 kilometers on a minus 30 or 40 day. And if we get stuck at the side of the road, will likely leave us freezing to death in a snowbank in a blizzard, because these vehicles are not safe to operate in rural Alberta winter driving conditions, because of those problems, limited range and heating capacity of these vehicles, right? So, but notwithstanding that, okay, we currently have 5 million light cars and trucks on the road in Alberta, right? Carney wants, by the end of next year, to have Alberta up to have 20% of the vehicles on the road in Alberta to be electric vehicles, right? First of all, we know that we don't produce enough electric vehicles in Canada, to meet that demand, period, right? But the other thing I want people to focus on, because I talked about, how our power grid is right on the bubble in terms of being able to make enough electricity for us on a minus 50 day, right? The Alberta power grid, the total grid, produces roughly 12,000 megawatts of electricity, right? Any guesses as to how much electricity is required to operate and charge 1 million EVs? 12,000 megawatts of electricity. So basically, to have Carney's dream come true and to have 20% of Alberta's vehicles by the end of next year in electric vehicles, right? We need to double the electric generation capacity of the entire power grid of the province of Alberta, which is simply a fantasy. It is not going to happen, right? But of course, they don't care whether we can drive or whether we're stuck in our homes or whatever, because they want everybody to live in their little World Economic Forum 15-minute cities where there's a traffic light camera on every corner and you can all be monitored and have your license plate read by license plate readers, right? So they can tell you if you've driven into town too many times this week to buy groceries. They can tell you, oh no, you're only allowed to leave your house Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays. How dare you try to leave your ranch on a Thursday, right? What the hell do you think you're doing? Here's a fine for you in the mail because we caught you with our license plate reader, at the corner, right? This is their plan for us on a going forward basis. So more taxes, and more regulation, and way less freedom. And of course, when you read Mark Carney's book, Values, that's of course what he talks about. Oh, well, there'll be a lot of pain for ordinary people. And of course, what does that tell you about his mentality when he refers to all of us as ordinary people, right? He thinks he's that much better than us. And all of his friends that are running the show from the World Economic Forum and telling Ottawa what to do, right? They all think that they are so much better than us that we should literally be controlled in every single aspect of our lives, all of it under this phony rubric of climate change, right? This is what we are voting ourselves out from underneath. This is why Alberta has to free itself from Ottawa. This is not a future for us. This is not a future for our children. It is pure insanity, and it is time for it to stop, right? I mean, and let's talk for a minute about the level of stupidity of these people in Ottawa and Ontario that are governing us, right? Like, does anybody remember 3.5, 4 months ago at the start of this phony trade war and this phony tariff war, right? There's Doug Ford, Premier of Ontario, turning red in the face, jumping up and down and going, we're going to teach the United States a lesson. We're going to cut off Alberta oil, right? And then somebody goes, hey, Doug, hey, all of your Ontario oil from Alberta goes through the U.S., so you're going to be cutting off your own oil. Oh, okay. Then we're going to cut off Saskatchewan potash. All their crops are going to die in the fields, right? And then somebody points out to them that would violate like 16 different trade agreements, and the punitive action that would be taken by the United States would completely cripple, the Ontario economy. But, you notice that at no point did Doug Ford say, hey, we're going to teach the U.S. a lesson on the integration of the North American auto industry, right? We're going to shut down all parts plants in Ontario, right, for 2 weeks and bring North American auto production to a shuddering halt. No, because if you live in Eastern Canada, if you live in, Toronto, Montreal, that whole corridor that thinks that they run the entire planet, right? Heaven forbid that they ever have to sacrifice anything themselves. All of the measures that they think, to solve whatever their imaginary problems are directed at us, right? And not at them. We're the ones that fund all of their foolishness. Like, remember when just before Trudeau left without a vote in Parliament or whatever, announced that he's going to build a $40 billion electric choo-choo train from Toronto to Montreal? Well, who is going to pay for that? We are, right? All of these projects that they have on a going forward basis are paid for by us, the Alberta taxpayer, right? $15 billion a year going to Quebec. The number's down now for Ontario, but it was $1 billion last year. It's down to $500 million this year, but $500 million to Ontario, another couple billion to the Maritimes. Tanya was speaking about the Value of Freedom document. What that document shows is that between Alberta all the taxes that leave Alberta to Ottawa, CPP and UI that we get underpaid on, right? We send $70 billion a year to Ottawa, and we get less than $20 billion a year back from Ottawa. Think about that, right? The other thing that document shows clearly is after costing out everything, right, and Alberta Armed Forces at 3% of GDP, tripling the spend for Indigenous communities that have been left in abject poverty by the government of Canada, we still have reserves in this province that do not have clean and safe drinking water, people living in homes that are completely chock full of black mold, 4 generations to a 1,200 square foot crappy CMHC house, living in third world conditions. We could triple the spend in Aboriginal communities to lift them out of the poverty that Canada's put them in. We could fund, this is my favorite part, our own immigration and most importantly, immigration and deportation department, right? Where we go back to that Alberta takes control once and for all of the people that come to this province, and to use Ralph Klein's terms, send all the Eastern creeps and bums back to Ontario. Bring in immigration laws, that say, no, we don't want, people with criminal records and child molesters from Newfoundland, Ontario, Quebec, and elsewhere coming to Alberta, because we'll have immigration laws that say we're not taking anybody in this province with criminal records, right, et cetera, et cetera. All of that is possible if we vote yes to Alberta independence, right? And this is the future that we need to have in mind clearly, when we go forward. I would urge everybody to go to the APP website. If you haven't read it yet, download a copy of The Value of Freedom online. It's free to download it online. I don't know if we're sold out today or not, whether we have any. Oh, good. Okay, we have hard copies in the back if people want to buy them. We're selling them for $20 a piece just to recover printing costs for them. But we have printed versions of The Value of Freedom in the back. I would urge you to read it. I would urge you to share them with your family and friends. I mean, we've given that document to CEOs, accountants, actuaries, economists. All kinds of people have been involved in reading that document, vetting that document, and paying attention to that document on an ongoing basis. No one can find any fault whatsoever with the numbers in that document. Mitch Sylvester, our CEO, met personally with Danielle Smith last night up in Lloydminster after the What's Next panel. He hand-delivered a copy of it to her because she hadn't read it yet. People in her office haven't read it yet. I would urge people to do, if you buy a copy, buy 2, donate 1 to your MLA, and say, have you read this yet? You're supposed to be my elected representative. Why the hell haven't you read this? The other thing I want all these people to internalize, and I'll get a little bit legal on you. The standard law in Canada of a fiduciary, right, is that of a reasonably prudent person of business managing their own affairs. And my challenge for Danielle Smith and every member of her government is to read that document and then explain to all of us after having read it how it's not a breach of your fiduciary obligations to us as our elected representatives not to immediately pursue Alberta independence. None of them have any good excuse for not reading the document. They have no good excuse for why it is, and I've challenged Danielle. I wrote an open letter to her, 3 or 4 months ago, challenging her. Like, we listed right off the top at least 20 reasons why Alberta would be so much better off if we were independent, right? Let's start with a complete end to all federal regulation, right? No gun grabs, right? No more, bullshit, carbon regulations, carbon caps, emission caps, production caps, attempts to stifle and destroy our economy through laws passed in Ottawa. Trudeau waking up in the middle of the night and deciding arbitrarily, what firearms we can own anymore and just outlawing things because they look too scary to him. I mean, I've been a competitive target shooter my entire life. I mean, he's even declared prohibited single-shot rifles that I own, right? And on what planet has anybody ever tried to rob a bank with a 28-pound target rifle? Right? I mean, none of this stuff makes any sense. I got a semi-automatic 22 that he's prohibited as if it was a machine gun, and that was during the last round of, stupid proposed firearms regulations, where they were going to talk about seizing all Canadian firearms, putting them in containers and shipping them over to Ukraine for the Ukrainian war effort, right? So, and again, when I was a kid, I was a soldier, so I know a little bit about this stuff. I mean, think about that, like container loads of mixed matched rifles, right, and handguns, without standardized ammunition, without standardized magazines, without training manuals, without anything, and on top of it, container loads of 22 caliber gopher rifles. You're literally, envisioning, 60-year-old Ukrainian conscripts, shaking in their boots on the front line, holding these 22 caliber rifles in the face of Russian Spetsnaz soldiers, right? I mean, that's how stupid all of this stuff is and how arbitrary it is, and why all of us, and again, it's a direct assault on our property rights, our personal liberty, etc., right? All of this foolishness has to stop. And again, by voting yes to the question, do you agree that Alberta should become a sovereign country and cease to be a province in Canada, we end all of that nonsense, right? No more income tax, no more carbon tax, no more capital gains tax, right? No more, and here's the big one, the government of Canada and all the little bright boys and girls at the CRA, right? They've all figured out that the largest store of wealth left in Canada that they haven't taken away from us is the equity in our homes. So forget about capital gains tax, where when you sell your house, right, you're going to have to pay some form of tax to the government. What they now want to do is to have a home equity tax. So every year you're going to have to value your home, like have an appraisal done of your house, right? And then you're going to have to pay tax on the amount of equity that you have stored in your house. That's the next thing that the Liberals are planning on doing to us, right? And again, we've got to vote ourselves out of that foolishness. We all bought our houses with post-tax dollars. Oh, heaven forbid that you've saved money in your house in post-tax dollars. We should all do what Mark Carney did and make sure that all of our money is in offshore accounts, that he won't disclose on little island tax havens that, that he and Brookfield helped to set up, right? And while we're on that subject, and I want to bounce back to nuclear reactors because I didn't finish that thought, right? That's the whole scheme for Mark Carney's future of Canada, right? So all those nuclear reactors, right, they are going to be built, owned, and controlled by Brookfield, right? And of course, when he talks about energy corridors, we're going to become an energy superpower, and we're going to have all these wonderful energy corridors, right? He's not talking about pipeline corridors. You notice they're really careful not to use the word pipeline, right? Energy corridors. So what they're going to have is all these huge high-tension power lines crisscrossing the country, crisscrossing all of the provinces, etc., and they're all going to be hooked up to small modular nuclear reactors owned by Brookfield to make up line loss and put power into the system, right? And then when they force all of you to buy the EVs that you don't want, think about that. Every time you go to a wall plug and you go to plug your EV in, what's actually happening is a direct line is being drawn from your wallet into a wall socket, over to Brookfield, and then into Mark Carney's offshore bank account. That's Mark Carney's vision for the future of Canada. This whole thing about so-called stakeholder capitalism Mark Carney, Brookfield, all of the corporations that are party to the annual meetings at the World Economic Forum, right? They are the stakeholders, right? We are simply the ones that have to pay for it, right? And have effectively become modern serfs to our feudal overlords that meet in Davos every year to decide what our future looks like. And of course, what we are saying, and through APP what we are saying, is it is time to bring an end to that. It is time for Albertans to rise up like we can collectively as a people, right? And announce that the days of our colonial oppression by Ottawa are over and vote yes to Alberta independence. So thank you very much.
Just one note on his climate change comment. How many of you listened to the 6 o'clock weather? Oh, gee, good. I'm glad I'm not the only one. But I happened to catch it the other night on Bridge City News, which I usually watch. And I won't be watching it again because she said, here is your Environment Canada climate change weather. And I went, click.
No kidding.
All right. I've got two short questions. One is, if this vote is delayed and us snowbirds are away from December 1st to March 31st, is there going to be a way for us to cast our vote online or whatever? Because we don't want to miss it.
I'm not sure. I haven't looked into the details of that. But, I'm actually thinking in terms of the timeline. We're going to be in court on the 19th, 20th, and 21st. Justice Feasby said he's going to have his decision out before Christmas. So we're going to have 120 days to gather signatures. So we don't think the vote's going to happen now until May or June of 2026 in any event, right? Unless we can figure a way around that, and we're working on it. So.
And my second question is, for us seniors that are going to be 70 next year, our RIFs and our investments a lot are out east, and they automatically, when you do a withdrawal, take the tax off. How is that going to work for us here in Alberta?
Bring your money home.
So
Right.
We are in the process of moving it to a bank here.
And look at the credit unions as well, like Bow Valley Credit Union and some of the Alberta institutions.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Yeah.
All right. My name's Michael Nodwell, and I look in the crowd and I see Brian and Vicky and I see a number of proud convoy members. And when we were down in Ottawa, we had a ridiculous amount of support. A ridiculous amount of support for the convoy a few years ago. So first thing, I want to thank everyone, because we had people obviously donating super bees of fuel to keep us going, amongst a whole bunch of other things. So my question for you guys and for the audience, when we were in Ottawa, we always wondered about these other groups and why didn't they step up to support us publicly. So for you guys, oil and gas, we've heard a lot of that. Where are these big CEOs? Have they contributed, or have they publicly said anything?
I think you need to get it through your head that a lot of the big CEOs and a lot of the billionaires don't like what we're doing.
True,
right?
But there's a lot of billionaires that don't like those billionaires. So they're on our side. Have you heard from them?
Well,
or these indigenous
we're talking
groups?
to all kinds of different people that have reached out and have offered support, for sure.
So
right?
You're in good shape?
Yeah, we're in great shape.
And my last comment, how optimistic are you?
I'm very optimistic, or I wouldn't be devoting the next year of my life to getting this done.
Right on. Thank you.
All right, thank you. And just to answer that, and I'm going to pass this over to Tanya and Tanner, but I want everybody to think about this, right? So, in October, the Carney gun grab is supposed to start, right? We've been working with Danielle to try to put in place a solution to that problem, which, I'm told, will be announced, at some point in September. So we're hopeful on the gun grab thing. But think about this. So imagine the Carney gun grab goes through in October. That's going to severely irritate 365,000 Albertans that have pals and our pals, right? So there's 365,000 people in this province that are going to have their personal property taken away by Mark Carney in October, right? Then next year he's going to be bankrupting all of our car dealerships by forcing them to take 20% of inventory in EVs. So we're going to have car dealerships going bankrupt all over the province, and there's going to be a shortage of new vehicles in Alberta that is going to really annoy people. And then keep in mind, we're at 8% unemployment right now. We know that Mark Carney is continuing to drive Canada's economy into the toilet. So literally by this time next year, I would imagine we're going to be at 10 or 15% unemployment in Alberta across the board. We're heading into a really deep recession. So you don't think that Albertans at that point are not going to vote for independence to get the hell out of that mess by next year? Damn right we will.
I just wanted to give a little different perspective that goes along with this. 252 years ago, there were people that had taxation without representation. And I grew up right there where there was a Boston Tea Party. And there was a country that got started because they had taxation without representation. And do you know, no matter how much you vote, every time there's a new representative here, Quebec gets a new one. You will never, ever outvote them. Never. So we are taxed without representation.
Do you have a question? Or?
So what I'm saying, okay, my question is, there looks like there has to be a referendum, and then we have to get their permission to do anything. But how do we, like, they're never
we're going to vote to leave
for
Canada,
us.
and then we're assured by the United States government that we've been meeting with, right, that the United States of America will recognize Alberta independence.
And I was, okay, I was at the farmer's market today, and there was a bunch of people signing to keep Alberta in Canada. So are those votes going to, like, cancel out our votes? Anyway.
No, the forever communism people, that's what I call them, right? You know, little Tommy Nothingburger and the forever communism people, they're never going to meet their goal, right? They've got these little flash mobs going out. They've got to get 3,300 signatures a day to meet their target of 297,000 signatures that they need. And they need 10% from every 10% of their signatures have to come from each of 87 constituency associations across the province of Alberta. It's never going to happen, right? But in the meantime, they're running around taking people's names and addresses and promoting a phony question in a, that's a complete scam, because the question, do you want to remain in Canada? It's about as dumb as asking, do you want Alberta to continue to be called Alberta? It's not a legislative proposal. It's not a constitutional question. It's simply a non-binding policy question, right? That the court, when I was in court, 2.5 weeks ago now, the court itself, Justice Feasby, described that question as a legally irrelevant nothing burger, right? So that whole process is just a big scam. Everybody needs to ignore it, and whatever you do, don't sign that petition, okay?
Okay, that kind of answered my question, but I've been seeing the Forever Canada everywhere, like on social media and out at events and stuff, collecting signatures, and I was wondering if we could actually start doing that like you're doing here.
Well, we're doing it. So sign up to sign our petition. But whatever you do, don't sign the Forever Canada petition. Don't help them.
Hi there. My name is Glenn. I have a question for any one of you, especially those that admire Danielle Smith. What do you have to say about the video that's been circulating that she had pointed out that she will do whatever it takes to keep the referendum from getting to yes? Was that a fake video or not?
Well, I don't know about I can let you talk about that too. I don't know about the premise of it being fake or not. I know that she has made it a little bit easier for Albertans to get to this referendum point by having Bill 54, which reduced the threshold to 177,000 signatures and increased the time we have to collect that from 90 days to 120 days. She is also, in my opinion, the leader of a province within Confederation, and I feel like she's bound a little bit by that role of her leadership. I do wish that she would take bolder action and she'd be more supportive, but as far as the video, I don't know if you have comments.
I've seen versions of it, but what everybody needs to keep in mind is that Danielle's running out of time. Like, she had her little 6-month courtship with Mark Carney, right? And it's up. Like Carney's 6 months is up on October 1st. And Danielle's going to look awfully foolish when not one of her demands to Mark Carney has been met, and her back's going to be to the wall, on this issue. On top of it, every day that goes by, more and more of her base, UCP members, support independence. Right now, over 70% of UCP members support Alberta independence. This creates a real problem for Danielle. And then hear from me, and I'll put this out to everybody in the room, if you can stomach coming up to Edmonton for a couple days at the end of November, right? That's when the UCP AGM is going to be held this year, right? I'm encouraging all of us, all of our family and friends, buy an APP hat, show up at the AGM, right? And vote for the board of directors slate that Mitch Sylvester and APP will be promoting at this year's AGM in Edmonton, right? Because we will take the UCP party from being a party with 70% of its members that support Alberta independence to having a board of directors of the UCP that gets to hire or fire a premier of Alberta, where we have a board of directors of the UCP being 100% in favor of independence, and that's our goal this year.
I hope it's an easy question. Thanks for being here. If we've already signed up online, we've already put our hand up for it, do you also want us to sign some list, or what do you want us to do for our name?
If you've already signed up online, don't sign again, because then that just has us confused as to duplicates. So thank you.
Good. I just wanted it to be clear for everybody. Thank you.
If you're getting the emails from APP, that means that they have you have been signed up. If you're not getting any emails from them for some reason, then it would be worth signing up again. Yeah, just if you're getting the normal membership ones, then you're good.
My name's Sherry. Can you speak to us about how the Indigenous treaties would be transferred over, and also about the federal parks that are inside of Alberta? That comes up in conversation a lot. So can you tell us how to tell people about that?
Yeah, well, first of all, under the Clarity Act, there's a requirement, for First Nations to be involved in any negotiations for independence. So that's that's set in stone, right? The other thing is, if you read the Value of Freedom document, the plan going forward within the business plan that we've created is to literally triple the amount of revenue going to First Nations in this province through respecting their treaties and Indigenous rights in this province, and literally by creating community endowments for them so that they will be truly self-governing and not having to come to the government on a regular basis, basically saying, please, great white father in Ottawa, can you help us? This has gone on for far too long. Obviously, everything that Ottawa has done nothing but keep Indigenous people in this province, in a state of subjugation. I was shocked the other day, and keep in mind, I've practiced in the area of treaty and Aboriginal rights law my entire career, but it was Dr. Dennis Modry that pointed this out to me. The latest StatsCan statistics for Alberta are that the average life expectancy of an Indigenous person in Alberta is 19 years less than a non-Indigenous person, right? That's shocking. I mean, that's the level of poverty and degradation that the government of Canada has kept these people in for 150 years. We should all be collectively embarrassed by this, right? So obviously, we think we have a robust plan going forward to bring the Indigenous people of Alberta on board. And my challenge to all the chiefs and councils in this province is, what is it that has you so concerned about not sending $15 billion to Quebec every year anymore, and having a substantial portion of that money, all of that money coming back to Alberta, first of all, and then having a substantial portion of that money going to lift your communities out of the abject poverty that Ottawa has left you in, right? So, that's the plan going forward, and we think it's a good one. So thank you.
Yeah, my name is Brian, and my question is, if all this is legal and the referendum and everything, why are we letting the government take us through the court procedure to decide if we can do this?
Well, again, it's just game playing on the part of the government. I still want to find out who it was that amended the Citizens Initiative Act to put that provision in. Somebody obviously did that to delay. And another provision of the Citizens Initiative Act is that the Chief Electoral Officer and Elections Alberta are supposed to work with question proponents to help them if there's any concern that the question that they have isn't legal or appropriate. Needless to say, they never reached out to Mitch Sylvester. They never reached out to our office to say, hey, we have some concerns about this. Would you like to add the words, consistent with the Constitution of Canada to the end of your referendum question so we don't have any concerns? We would have done it in a heartbeat. Right? But of course, this is game playing. They are trying to delay us, right? And this is going to come back, if Danielle doesn't simply adopt our question and put it forward under the Referendum Act, which she can do, she has the ability to completely ignore the court. If she doesn't do that, I think there's going to be hell to pay come the AGM, and that's why I want all of us there. So thank you. Thanks for the question.
Oh, okay. Hi, thank you. I loved today's meeting. This was the first one we've been to. But I guess I come into this with being an advocate of people with disabilities. And I know there's not a lot of indication in the framework about how that rolls into Alberta as a sovereign nation. Obviously, there's always going to be social programs. But I find as someone living with a person with disabilities, the abundance of our income support comes from the federal government because the Alberta government core program AISH counts too much into spousal income in order to give us any kind of monetary supplements monthly or annually. So you talk a lot about Canada Pension Plan, but there's no talk about Canada Pension Disability.
Yeah, no, that's fair enough. But you need to understand that when you look at the document that we've prepared and when you read the value of freedom, the idea is that all federal services and transfers, will be covered within a sovereign and independent Alberta. The other thing to keep in mind, the document that we put out, it's interesting. It says that the fiscal capacity surplus in year one will be between $30 and $50 billion a year. Right? Well, when we did that, and when we put a pin in that document, it was literally 2 weeks before Premier Smith announced an $8.5 billion surplus this year, right? So that document was based on a $6.5 billion deficit last year, as opposed to an $8.5 billion surplus this year. So all of our projections are literally light by $15 billion, right? So we're going to have lots of money in Alberta to increase, the support for people in this province without in any way breaking the bank or taking away from, the massive tax cuts that we think need to happen for this province to thrive. So thank you.
Sorry, at my last part of my first question, what is happening to federal parks? How do they become Alberta parks?
Yeah, they're part of Alberta. They're staying with Alberta. And what's that?
We'd have to negotiate to buy those from...
Well, I don't think we need to buy them. They're part of the territory of the province of Alberta. And, and again, it's one of the things, and I missed if Tanya was speaking about it tonight, but let's not forget that over the last 40 years, we've put close to $8 billion worth of transfer payments into the rest of Canada. If you were to put compound interest on that over a 40-year period, I'm sure that Tanner, would tell you that I'm not far off by saying that number with compound interest, going back from 40 years, year one, and then carrying it forward through actuarial tables, the federal government probably owes us something close to $6 or $7 trillion, which would more than compensate them for any of their, any of the so-called national parks that will become Alberta parks.
We're over here now. In regards to the Indigenous communities, will the tripling of their money result in a phasing out of that funding as they build their own capacity to successfully gain their own sovereignty and manage their own communities and eventually build a one-tier Alberta?
Well, as far as that goes, I mean, we're never, this whole idea of equality, it's never going to happen, right? If people are stuck on that idea, they have constitutionally protected treaty and Aboriginal rights. Their ancestors literally owned 100% of the land in this province, and what they got in exchange for that were the promises under the treaties. So, the short answer is the community endowments will be created, and these community endowments will continue to grow into the future for the benefit of those people in those communities, period. Thank you.
Thank you.
Anyone else has a question here? Just raise your hand.
We'll only take maybe one or two more because we're hitting 9 o'clock.
One and then we're done. Maybe two, okay. Two last questions.
So what's happening in Alberta is not even confined to Canada. Part of the primary thing going on is what's happening in the EU and the EU's desire to control food, to control governments. There's a push there that we are feeling the effects of that's happening all around the world. You can see them confiscating land in Europe.
There's no doubt about it. And then we have Mark Carney literally saying that his plan for Canada going forward is for Canada to join the EU.
Yep.
Just to be really clear, right?
Yes.
I want to be governed by a European bureaucrat, said no Albertan ever, right? It's not going to happen. It'll literally be over my dead body.
And I think that's important to remember because this is a much bigger push by far more powerful people than are found in Canada. We're even to the EU. We're just a colony, not Alberta. Canada is a colony.
Oh, there's no doubt about it.
To the EU.
There's no doubt about it. And Carney's the thick edge of the wedge that they're driving into our country. No doubt. All right, well, thank you. Oh, last one. Okay.
Can you explain a little bit about the military? We're assuming that a lot of the military would just transfer into Alberta, but when they've signed some kind of an agreement with Canada, can they even do that?
Well, I think any soldier that's subject to military discipline would have to take their discharge legally, under the terms of their service contract. But there's certainly, lots of veterans in Alberta. There's lots of, soldiers in Canada that have been legally discharged from the Canadian Armed Forces that would be welcome to join an Alberta Army as a basic training cadre to get, an armed forces up and running. And certainly, and it's set out in the Value of Freedom document, we're proposing that because of the amount of fiscal surplus and capacity surplus that will be available in Canada, that that we would have an Alberta equivalent of the U.S. GI Bill, so that anybody, that serves in the Alberta Armed Forces, would then have their education paid for, all of those types of things once they leave the armed forces. And we would extend that offer to any legally discharged Canadian Armed Forces service member that wants to come to Alberta and join the Alberta Armed Forces. So that's the plan going forward. Just read the Value of Freedom. There's a whole section on it.
I did read it. I didn't actually see that section, so I'll have another look.
Yeah, it's referenced in there. Thank you.
Okay. And then would their pensions or whatever programs, if they got discharged from Canada, then would that?
Well, their pensions would be owed, but continue to be owed by the government of Canada, and any new pension rights would accrue, through their service to the Alberta Armed Forces, I would think. Thank you. All right, well, thank you, everyone, for coming out tonight. As always, real honor and privilege to be able to come to speak to all of my friends and neighbors in southern Alberta, so thank you very much. And I know Tanya and Tanner feel exactly the same way, so thank you very much.
Okay. I just need to quickly announce a couple things. In Fort Macleod, if you're in that area on Monday, 4 o'clock, they're going to have a hot dog wiener roast at the park right by the river, the one, as you're heading toward Calgary on the west side of the highway. Claresholm's having theirs, north end of Claresholm at Top Hand. I'd like to thank Bonnie Henry and her chapter for putting this together tonight, and it was at short notice. And the last thing is the Value of Freedom tonight is at no charge. We had a wonderful person willingly print us off many, many copies. So they are for your taking, and we thank them very, very much. Have a great evening and safe travels.